this episode, we have Liam Walker from Intelligent Charging Systems returning to the Future Skills podcast. Liam is talking about the current state of the EV charging industry and also discusses the synergy with solar and battery storage. Let's join the conversation, hosted by our very own Ryan.
So Liam, welcome back to Future Skills podcast. I think this is your second time, isn't it, joining us?
Yeah, twice a charm, mate.
Twice a charm, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ryan. No, it's good to be back at Universal Skills Group as always, mate, so thank you for having me.
No worries. I mean, I think last time you were here was 4 months ago. So
really,
back in January, which feels like a lifetime ago. Feels like a lot has happened in that time. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
If you can kind of talk about, from Intelligent Charging Systems perspective, like how it's been for you guys.
Yeah, so there's obviously been sort of widespread coverage on the changes within the industry, not just from a kind of an electrical perspective in terms of performance and safety, but certainly for grants that are available that are related to obviously the end user and the installer. So yeah, there has been an awful lot going on in the sort of early part of 2022, and yeah, hopefully we're geared up and prepared for the changes that are coming into place later this year and beyond. So
yeah, my perspective, I think a lot of people are kind of seeing this at the moment. We've obviously got rising energy prices, fuel prices going up. There's got to be some sort of impact, you'd think, on kind of the EV market. I don't know if you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, our government are clever, aren't they? They've put the cost of electricity up after encouraging everyone to switch to an electric car. So no jokes aside, I think there's certainly been widespread coverage and focus in the media and in the industry in terms of comparing the cost of running an internal combustion engine vehicle against an electric vehicle. I think it's certainly been one of the factors that people within the EV charging industry have liked to discuss and look at in terms of trying to justify to people considering the switch. Well, actually, do you realise you may save this amount? And yeah, you are right. The cost has gone up, but so has the cost of the fuel pumps as well, quite significantly. So, there's still certainly in terms of a cost saving benefit for an individual. I still think it weighs in favour of switching. It certainly does. That's purely just from the financial. Of course, there's a lot of other benefits from switching to electric, but no, from you guys are a business, and I see you have Universal Skills Group branded vehicles outside and whatnot. And there's certainly a desire to increase the green credentials and meet sustainability targets from companies. So yeah, it's trying to make sure that they transition to provide the services that they're required to help move their business forward, to show that they are, they're conscious of their carbon footprint and making sure it's a cost-effective solution. So yeah, we've been consulted by all manner of people from SMEs, from the one-man band electrician to the shop owner who's thinking of having one outside his shop, to somebody who owns a commercial building and lets that out. So yeah, it's been great in terms of the interaction we've had with respective target audiences.
Yeah, because you think obviously with all the government stuff's happening at the moment in terms of improving the infrastructure across the board, we're definitely going in that direction in terms of everyone kind of shifting from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. I think that is definitely the future. I think one thing that kind of puts a lot of people off at the moment is this fear-mongering about obviously energy prices going up and the cost of filling up at the pump also going up at the same time. It's kind of what would you say is still the justification from moving from one to the other at this stage? And as well, you've got to think is about, I think we mentioned with Dan last time about the cost of EV not quite matching what you have with a diesel petrol car at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think anybody who's got a vested interest in our industry, Ryan, would struggle to argue that the outright cost of these vehicles is certainly significantly more than their petrol or diesel equivalent. However, you're a little bit younger than me, but I remember a time when flat screen televisions first came out and consumer demand has subsequently led to those reducing in price and becoming a lot more affordable. And I know it's perhaps a slightly far-fetched comparison comparing a flat screen television to something that's highly dependent upon in terms of a vehicle, but consumer demand, I suspect, will make them a more affordable purchase. And having said that, there's not many people these days that do buy a car outright. I know there still are some. A lot of people tend to get them on, some sort of leasing platform, and there are some really favourable rates. I do take an interest. I go and look to see what's available and what on offer. I do look online, and there does seem to be an increasing amount of affordable packages that are put on offer, because of course people looking to switch to electric, they're an attractive target audience to aim at, aren't they? Also, as you know, there's quite a substantial amount of people who are fortunate enough to drive a business vehicle, or their businesses have a fleet of vehicles that they're perhaps looking to, if they haven't already, looking to transition to electric. So I suspect consumer demand will influence the cost of those vehicles outright at the minute, because they're still, unfortunately, although the interest is increasingly growing at a rapid rate, they're still a minority compared to their diesel or petrol equivalent at the moment. But I think the data and statistics suggest that it's 1 in 16 now in the UK of new vehicles purchased are electric. So we're looking to see that shorten even further and get closer to some of the figures that are comparable on the continent. So
you make a valid point in terms of over time you'd expect that EV cars would get a lot cheaper than what will come into parity with what we've got now for petrol and diesel. And I think it all comes down to the price of the battery at the moment. I think it's the most expensive component within an electric vehicle. So you'd imagine over the next couple of years, I think we're seeing it now with certain car manufacturers, their plans are starting to change more towards going full electric, plug-in and hybrid vehicles rather than investing in petrol and diesel cars. So you'd assume with this influx of demand that you would reach a point of economies of scale with that stuff, and prices would begin to start falling.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things that are linked to this, Ryan, that maybe some people, myself included, at times forget about. You're quite right. These and it is your more recognisable car manufacturers who are committing to this. So that the COP26 climate change conference up in Scotland before Christmas, there's a number of very high profile manufacturers who've already are committed to adhering to those targets for the stopping of developing those internal combustion engines and focusing on a pure electric range. Some of them have committed to that slightly later, but have committed to having hybrid versions available. And I read recently that they're looking to build a gigafactory in terms of for a gigabactory battery manufacturing plant, so to aid the development and increase the development production rate, because the demand is there. You speak to people who've got cars and ordered, and then some of your colleagues here at the Universal Skills Group have now taken ownership of their new electric vehicles. But there was a time speaking to both Dan and Darren where they were talking to me about lead times extending and increasing. So the demand is there, but perhaps the supply isn't quite at the right rate to meet that demand. So investments are coming in thick and fast to ensure that the demand can be met with the supply. So
I think that kind of tails off quite nicely actually, talking about EV infrastructure at the moment. As I kind of mentioned before, government have put quite a bit of time in to kind of come up with this plan in terms of investing in an EV infrastructure that works across the country basically. I just want to get your thoughts in terms of do you think that we're currently at a point where if demand for EV increases, are we there? Is the infrastructure in place to kind of match that at the moment?
Right now, in terms of charging provision, which is probably the first port of call where you'd focus your attentions right now, is without no for people at the minute who haven't taken the leap of faith and switched. One thing that is key to remember though is, unlike a petrol or diesel vehicle, you can recharge your electric vehicle at night time, which most people don't require their car for, whilst you're in bed or whilst the car's inactive and state, or now we're at the workplace here, my vehicle's charging outside your premises, my car's stationary. You can't refuel a petrol or diesel, unless you're in the Formula One industry and what have you. But while the vehicle's stationary, you have the ability to replenish an electric vehicle. You do not have that luxury with a petrol or a diesel vehicle, so you have to And listen, now, my previous trips to a petrol forecourt and yours, no doubt, they're very short in most cases, and increasingly manufacturers of charge points and those sites that are looking to have charger provision, they're trying to replicate that positive user experience by increasing the rate of charge that these charge points can offer, so that the users are in and out, and it's quick. But in terms of access to charge points, no, that needs to increase, and you only have to go on the Zap Map platform to look at both the map in terms of charge point population, but also the statistics to suggest how frequently new charge points are being installed, whether that's the AC units that you have outside that are charging on single or three phase, or the DC rapid charger types, where people are, visiting service stations or supermarkets or hotels or public car parks where they want to maximise their charging provision in a very short period of time. But ultimately not everybody has access to off-street parking, Ryan, so there's government funding available to all UK local authorities, the Orcs fund for 20 million quid for this financial year, so it's on-street residential charge point scheme. So I'm very interested to see the innovation development from manufacturers to provide that. We're perhaps not quite at that point in terms of having an on-street offering. When I say that, I mean in terms of, say, to a lamp post, where some manufacturers are looking at developing a charge point that's built within a street lamp. Certainly from a DC charger perspective, that's certainly on our immediate roadmap, and something that we will fortunately have added to our arsenal before the close of this year. But yeah, £20 million worth of funding for on-street residential charge point scheme probably doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that there's more and more of these EV charging forecourts that are popping up, the fact that a lot of employees have the capacity to charge at work, and companies like yourselves are recognising that they need to provide a charging provision for their staff, the argument that there's not an existing infrastructure whatsoever for people to switch, I think is becoming one that's more and more difficult to back up with proof. And like I said, you look at the data on ZapMap in terms of how frequently new charge points are being installed, it's pretty extensive. And you're based here at a training provider. No doubt from the footfall you have entering the building for people looking to get educated on electric vehicle charge point installation, there's certainly a demand there to provide those courses. So do we have enough installers? Well, if you're able to get an electrician to come round to your house, mate, to wire a plug socket, you've done great, because where I live, you've got, the demand for any trade, but electricians in particular is, it's difficult to get hold of one. So, no, of course, there's a reason why you're able to offer so many courses and have them, fully subscribed to, is because there's not enough and the demand is there. So yeah, very interesting. And one point I will add, sorry, before you move on, is that I speak to people who say, well, I'm not switching until there's a 500, 600, 700 mile range electric vehicle available. Now, you think of the development that the batteries have to undertake to be able to encompass that amount of range, the size of the batteries, and building that within an electric vehicle and making sure that it's cost effective, because to have a battery that's capable of that sort of range, it's extensive battery packs, and it's going to add a lot of weight to a vehicle. And development and in turn, you spoke about it earlier about affordability. That's not going to necessarily bring the cost of these vehicles down in the short term. So are we better off aiming to have this sort of current range, which I think is extensive at the minute, in terms of there's a lot of vehicles coming out now that can do 200, 250 or even over 300 miles of range in a single charge. Are we better off investing in making sure the charging infrastructure is more accessible for people to charge maybe more frequently at arguably at a quicker rate? So there's certainly an argument at the minute to say, do we need to develop vehicles that have larger range? Maybe so. Do we need to improve on the charging infrastructure? Undoubtedly. So that's something that I at the moment I'm certainly speaking to more and more people about.
Yeah, and to be fair to your point, like in terms of like the range of vehicles nowadays when it comes to EV charging, they're not better than what they were. Like if you look back at like Tesla, like a decade ago, like the range on those, like you'd be paying a premium for 300 odd miles, I'd say. But even when you look at, like, again, petrol and diesel cars, you're talking 300 or 400 when you fill up a tank, and then again you're having to refuel anyway. So, that's getting to a point, I think, of parity now with that stuff, I guess. My question really is then, in terms of looking at the infrastructure, obviously parts of it for an installer, obviously being upskilled from, say, like a normal electrician to go into EV charge point installation is, one of the things we talk about is the OZEV grant and what that now means for installers. Because I know you kind of mentioned about on-street parking. I think the grants are still in place for that, but obviously the home charging scheme's ended from March. So do you think there needs to be more put in place around the grants? When you spoke to Dan last time, I think as well, you mentioned, I think it needs to be a bit more clear in terms of like what should be happening in that area.
Yeah, it can't get much clearer than stopping it altogether, getting rid of it altogether, in terms of the domestic grant. Now, listen, you're right to allude to previous discussions with Dan, and certainly it's been a topical discussion, Ryan, for so long about the difficulty or the lack of clarity at times that OZEV have perhaps provided. And one thing I will say is that I think OZEV get a little bit at times of unjust and unfair stick, but we're in the industry, we're seeing them recognising that they need to go to greater lengths to support the installer network, who can in turn support their customer base for accessing grants. And they have certainly made an effort to provide a lot more clearer guidelines and instructions, both to charge point manufacturers like ourselves. So in recent times we've received correspondence from OZEV where they've detailed changes and provided guidance notes perhaps to both manufacturers. I've seen it for installers as well. So if that's not somebody who's trying to work collaboratively with people in the industry, I don't know what is. So it's been great to see them acknowledge that yes, maybe we could be better in terms of our communication. But yeah, I think if you speak to a lot of the contractors who were fitting charge points domestically and accessing the EVHS, Electric Vehicle Home Charging Scheme grant, I think I have yet to meet one that's disappointed that grant's ended. Now that might come as a shock to some people who are new to the industry, because they might think, well, if that grant's gone, is that going to stop domestic customers and from being encouraged to switch to an electric vehicle where they can access a funding pot to get a charge point fitted? Now, maybe so, but I think the greater analogy is that people are having to switch to electric, whether it's from business purpose or whether it's a personal choice because they actually want to contribute to reducing our nation's carbon footprint, Ryan. But they're going to be a common commodity or a necessity. Yeah. So from a government's perspective, they may be moving more towards, well, we've kind of given people a nudge to switch.
Yeah.
Now they're becoming a requirement based on the guidelines and the targets that we've got for the future in terms of by 2030 the ceasing of any new internal combustion engine vehicles. I think they're looking at it more as, well, people are going to see these as a requirement. So whether we provide a grant or not, people are going to continue to switch to electric, aren't they? So, but the feedback in general is, no, we're pleased the domestic grant has gone. The paperwork was an absolute nightmare. It was very time consuming. There are companies out there who, as you guys will be aware of because you've worked with, like EV Comply, for example, who are a fantastic platform. There are others out there as well. EV Comply are a company we also have liaised with. Seems to be a platform that contractors welcome in terms of getting support for completing grant paperwork, getting support for job completion in terms of categorising at what stage a particular job is at, support with lead generation, support with tech support, because it's not always possible to access tech support at the manufacturer direct, and I know that personally now I'm speaking to contractors. So having skilled people that work for a third party, so to speak, who have got experience in the industry, it's only going to help us as a manufacturer. So, but yeah, there are a lot of new grants that are becoming available, and people are talking about the small to medium business enterprise grants for both charging provision or certainly charging infrastructure in terms of they're preparing charging provision on these sites. That's going to be massive take up on that. Landlords now have the capacity to access a grant pot for charge point provision. Local authorities with social housing schemes also have access to a funding pot now for grants towards EV charging provision. Small accommodation sites, so the B&B type place, whatever. There's certainly been a conscious thought by OZEV to look at target audiences that should have the benefit, Ryan, of a funding pot to accelerate their transition to having EV charging provision on site. So it's exciting because I think contractors seeing opportunities with their existing and potential new customers to say, are you aware of this? And I think OZEV in turn are saying, right, we need to provide more information to help these people articulate the message to the masses. So that's great from an industry perspective.
It all comes down to communication, I think, between obviously government, OZEV, the installers, and the customers. And part of it comes down to the education that's out there in terms of EV, and I think that's still like a challenge for you guys as well as like other kind of charge point businesses in general, just in terms of being able to persuade people the benefits of switching from EV. And we've kind of spoken about this at length. But if you could, like, I don't know, take a crystal ball and say, what would you like to see happen within the EV space within, say, the next sort of 2 or 3 years? Like, what would be your sort of ideal situation for the market? Okay,
from a manufacturing perspective, I mean, we develop both hardware and software because software is becoming increasingly more pertinent and in demand in terms of it's very rare now, Ryan, on a commercial site where you fit just one charge point, which results in the proprietors wanting to ensure that the available load on their site, the spare capacity they've got for an electric vehicle charge point network is managed accordingly from a safety perspective. They've probably not got the capital to invest in upgrading their infrastructure on site, so they need to utilise what they've got in a safe manner to provide charging provision. So software is becoming increasingly so a highly in-demand service, and you'll see software development companies who seem to be springing up more and more now. We get approached on a regular basis, as I'm sure other hardware manufacturers do, from these independent software developers. We have our own back-end software platform, but the beauty of our products and others in the industry is, they have communications protocol that's kind of industry standard now. That means our charge points can be visible and can communicate on other people's back-end systems, so we're not just fixed to them only being able to work on our iCS platform. So it's having that flexibility, because at some sites that'll have yours included as our different manufacturers' charge points on site, both past and present. So there needs to be kind of a unified method of which those charge points can potentially communicate to one another. They can all interact on the same system here and of course elsewhere. So from what I would like to see, certainly greater harmony between the distribution network operators and charge point manufacturers and installers, because we're all going to need to do a bit of hand holding with one another. And when I speak to contractors, Ryan, there seems to be, in a lot of cases, there seems to be an apprehension from contractors to want to explore developing a really healthy relationship with DNOs, and maybe that's from past experience where they've had difficulty in liaising with their local DNOs, or the feedback they've had or the interactions they've had have not always been overly positive. Now, DNOs are, I'm sure, and it might be a good idea, it might be a brilliant one for you to consider for a future podcast, if you could get a distribution network operator from one of the companies in question. I don't know whether it's Northern Power Grid here, in Wakefield, but if you could get one of those to come on and talk about EV from their perspective, that'd be a massive. For me, I'd be really intrigued and interested to see how they see things from their perspective. It's great everybody that's switching to EV is reducing their carbon footprint, but of course when they plug into the grid, they're pulling from what's already a stretched grid, in some cases maybe, according to some, oversubscribed.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a conscious effort to provide respite for the grid moving forward. So I do think you'll see a reintroduction of incentives to both domestic and commercial customers to look at self-generation, whether it's PV or wind, having battery storage. We've certainly gone down the route of developing our existing and future products so they've got solar compatibility, but also one exciting forthcoming addition to our product family is domestic battery storage, and no doubt we'll expand that to commercial battery storage as well. But yeah, I'd love to see greater harmony between all interested parties, if you like, all parties concerned. So when I speak to contractors, I do advise them, look, if I was a contractor, and I most definitely am not, but if I am, I'd be looking at EV charge point installs around and thinking, how can I make my life simpler and easier? So I would be perhaps going above and beyond to communicate with the local DNOs to say, this is what charge point I'm using, this is the method of load management I'm using. Now, in a lot of cases, that's a prerequisite and a requirement, particularly if you're fitting multiple charge points. But even if I was fitting one at Mr. and Mrs. Smith's house, I would communicate with the DNO to say, I'm fitting this charge point at this property, this is the method of load management that's going to be installed on site, just to kind of give them peace of mind that I'm trying to make a conscious effort to have safety as paramount in my install. There's a number of domestic customers who may have quite a small fuse at their house and they've got an electric shower, electric oven, tumble dryers, dishwashers, and potentially a 32 amp charger that could all be operating at one time. Now that's quite, to a contractor and to a DNO, I would imagine that's quite a scary thought. So certainly for what I'm seeing is there's a growing desire from contractors to make sure there's load management installed both domestically or commercially. And I often say, look, from a peace of mind perspective, articulate that to your local DNO, because what you might get is somebody saying, a DNO replying say, oh, thank you, Ryan, for making us aware of this. And that's the beginning of a burgeoning relationship that you as a contractor, let's say in this example, are going to need moving forward. So
good stuff. I mean, I think what you're alluding to quite a lot there is having a kind of smart network in place. So having, smart charging, load management on the grid as well. So, charging at off-peak times and at times where there isn't load on the grid, essentially. But it's interesting as well you bring up solar, PV and battery, because it's kind of all becoming part of this growing sort of renewable push that I think the UK is going down. I know Universal Skills here, we're kind of developing out solar PV and battery storage course, and as well moving into heat pumps. So we're definitely seeing benefit from that, and with, the inquiries around those sort of areas are kind of increasing as well. So is that kind of like the future then, do you think, for iCS kind of continue down that route?
Well, I think you've just answered that there, Ryan. I certainly for us, I mean, we see great synergy between EV charging and battery storage, and the fact that more and more people are going to look at having solar provision on site, whether that be domestic or commercial. And I think there was, I've been in this industry for some time now, and I've crossed paths with many solar panel and inverter distributors and installers as well. And when the feed-in tariff disappeared, I think there was a general consensus that they may see a real nosedive in demand for solar and self-generation tech. And anybody I speak to who's involved in that industry couldn't be further from the truth. They say the demand is as high as it's ever been. I think the fact that electricity tariffs are going up has perhaps driven more people to look at whether they can make a long-term investment in having renewable tech installed on their premises, again, domestic or commercially, and look at kind of a return on investment period. I absolutely do. I think that hence why we've developed our own battery device, which is coming out in the near future. We want customers to be able to have the ability to fill their battery up from solar generated energy. At night time, when obviously there's no solar being generated, have the ability to fill or charge a battery off the mains supply. If there's the reintroduction of these off-peak tariffs that you've mentioned. And then we also want them to have the choice as to whether they want to discharge the battery to charge their vehicle or power their home, or if they want to continue taking from the mains and keep that stored energy in the battery in reserve for other means, whatever they seem fit. So yeah, we absolutely do. There certainly seems to be a growing trend from the electric wholesaler market to invest in developing their renewables and green tech expertise. Certainly the wholesale partners that we work with, they've made big committed investment to work with some of those highly reputable solar and PV wholesalers. So yeah, it's very exciting. It's as an industry, it's fast paced and constantly growing and evolving. When I saw you at the event that CEF put on at Sheffield last week, it was great to see. It was great to see the exhibitors and what innovation they've undertaken with their own product offering, and both from a charge point perspective and relatable tech. So yeah, very, very exciting. And I do think it will be a common occurrence where there's solar, there's battery storage, there's electric vehicle charging provision, and they're kind of working hand in hand. So.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of food for thought there, Liam. I mean, thank you for joining us today.
No problem.
Hopefully we get you in a bit more than 4 months next time. Maybe
absolutely.
See how we get on at the year. Mark.
We always seem to say we must do this again and must do it soon, and then we all get busy with our respective schedules. But yeah, listen, it's the relationship we've got with Universal Skills Group is one that we hope continues to grow. So I certainly hope it's sooner than 4 months' time that I'm back in whatever capacity, Ryan. So thank you for having me this morning.
It's all right, put you in for next week in that case.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
All right, cheers, Liam.
Thank you,
very much.
Cheers, mate.
That was a very interesting discussion between Ryan and Liam. There are some exciting new developments coming in this industry, and at Universal Skills we'll be keeping you up to date. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to check out our YouTube channel. See you soon.